As the United States expands and settles in the American West toward the close of the 19th century, the United States Cavalry begins, too, to expand and evolve. The abolition of slavery in the United States saw other countries following suit. In 1886, the island nation of Cuba abolishes slavery, and former enslaved men and women joined the workforce as farmers and other members of the working class. Still under Spanish rule, Cuba soon sees an influx of investment capital from the United States, thanks to their tobacco, sugar, and mining operations, to the tune of nearly $50 million. By 1895, labor unions have risen to prominence in the nation, and Cuban revolutionaries like José Martí begin to advocate for independence from Spain. While Martí gains much sympathy and support in the United States through political organizations and clubs across the country, he also recognizes the fact that if Cuba does not achieve independence, the United States may annex the land for its own. This belief is further anchored by the annexation plans for the island of Hawaii and the sentiments of Secretary of State James G. Blaine, who said,
"That rich island, the key to the Gulf of Mexico, is, though in the hands of Spain, a part of the American commercial system. If ever ceasing to be Spanish, Cuba must necessarily become American and not fall under any other European domination."
Though many in the United States push for American intervention in the Cubans' fight for independence, the country remains neutral, though the capture of ships smuggling weapons to the severely outgunned Cuban revolutionaries by U.S. Navy and Coast Guard inadvertently aids the Spanish in the fight. In January of 1898, a riot in Havana led the U.S. Consul General to wire Washington for aid, fearing for American lives in Cuba. The following month sees the battleship USS Maine, sent in response to the cable, destroyed by explosion, and yellow journalism from Joseph Pulitzer's New York World and William Randolph Hearst's New York Journal only adds fuel to the fire of American anti-Spanish sentiment when it is initially reported that the Maine was sunk by a Spanish mine. On April 20th, 1898, the United States officially declared war on Spain.
Wood and I were speedily commissioned as Colonel and Lieutenant Colonel of the 1st United States Volunteer Cavalry. This was the official title of the regiment, but for some reason or other, the public promptly christened us the Rough Riders. At first, we fought against the use of the term, but to no purpose. And when finally the generals of division and brigade began to write informal communications about our regiment as the Rough Riders, we adopted the term ourselves.
One of the voices calling for American involvement in the Cuban fight for independence was former Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Navy, Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt is named second in command to Colonel Leonard Wood, chosen to lead the 1st United States Volunteer Cavalry, one of 3 units established by the United States Cavalry to assist in the war effort. As ordered by President William McKinley, cavalry volunteers are organized and trained in the southwestern states of Arizona, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Texas, reasoning that the soldiers from these areas will be well equipped to handle the similar climate in Cuba. The end of the American Civil War had seen a weakened military force in the United States, but McKinley's call to action inspires thousands to apply for a position. As Roosevelt says, the difficulty in organizing was not selecting, but rejecting men.
Harvard being my own college, I had such a swarm of applications from it that I could not take 1 in 10. What particularly pleased me, not only in the Harvard, but the Yale and Princeton men, and indeed in these recruits from the older states generally, was that they did not ask for commissions. With hardly an exception, they entered upon their duties as troopers, in the spirit which they held to the end, merely endeavoring to show that no work could be too hard, too disagreeable, or too dangerous for them to perform, and neither asking nor receiving any reward in the way of promotion or consideration.
Strong shooters and horsemen all, the volunteers are from a wide range of backgrounds. Former miners and prospectors, cowboys, Native Americans, hunters, gamblers, and retired police and military personnel, they were looking for a path to further adventure. Initially, they are led by Colonel Leonard Wood, and known colloquially and in the press as Wood's Weary Walkers. Despite the fact that they are a cavalry unit, much of their fighting and traveling was done on foot, engaging in hand-to-hand combat due to inadequate transportation and logistics while they were entering Cuba. Thanks to Roosevelt, who was, at first, Wood's lieutenant colonel, and soon the leader of the 1st Cavalry, the men are well equipped and armored. Through his connections as the former Assistant Secretary of the Navy, Roosevelt sees to it that the members of the 1st Volunteer Cavalry are outfitted with the finest gear and weaponry. The Rough Riders, as the press soon dubbed them, are given 1892 through 98 Springfield bolt-action rifles, Colt .45 revolvers, Bowie knives, and the best horse accoutrements and camping equipment. The unit is also equipped with 2 M1 985 Colt Browning machine guns, a 7mm Mauser caliber gas-operated tripod-mounted weapon. While the Rough Riders are issued the same quality and quantity of weaponry and supplies as the regular U.S. Army, their uniforms, by design, set the men apart. Roosevelt describes their choice of attire.
The Rough Rider uniform was a slouch hat, blue flannel shirt, brown trousers, leggings, and boots, with handkerchiefs knotted loosely around their necks. They looked exactly as a body of a cowboy cavalry should look.
By June of 1898, the 1st Volunteer Cavalry sees their first engagement with the Spanish in Cuba at the Battle of Las Guasimas. Weakened from their march and beset by disease and infection, still the cavalry marched. When Edward Marshall, a reporter who had been embedded with the Rough Riders and who had been inspired by the men around him to join the fight, was killed, many mistook him at long range for Colonel Wood. Hearing of Wood's supposed death, Roosevelt takes charge of the men and leads the cavalry to their first victory of the Spanish-American War. Later, it is revealed that Wood had survived, but General Joseph Wheeler, a veteran of the Civil War, had been stricken with illness, having been replaced by the 2nd Brigade's commander, Brigadier General Samuel S. Sumner, to take over his command. Wood assumed Sumner's former command of the 2nd Brigade as Brigadier General, and Roosevelt is promoted to colonel and tasked with leading the 1st Unit. Roosevelt first leads the Rough Riders into the Battle of San Juan Hill, which will become a decisive victory for the Americans, but not by Roosevelt's hand alone. Initially, simply charged with holding a position at San Juan Hill, near a Spanish entrenchment, the Rough Riders marched 8 miles to the area with little to no plan of attack. The enemy entrenchments are on a hill dubbed Kettle Hill, and this position and San Juan Hill are separated by a pond and a small valley called San Juan Heights by the Americans. While the 1st and 10th Infantry charge the trenches and blockhouse at San Juan Hill, they are assisted by the 10th Cavalry, also known as the Buffalo Soldiers, a cavalry division made up of African-American cavalrymen. It is the 10th Cavalry that would later lead Roosevelt and his Rough Riders into battle at Kettle Hill. Roosevelt's troops provided support to the Buffalo Soldiers, and when it was thought that the Spanish, with a superior position and larger numbers, might claim victory in the battle, Lieutenant John H. Parker commands a trio of Gatling guns, firing over 18,000 .30-caliber Army rounds at the enemy. Sadly, the Buffalo Soldiers' contribution to the victory at San Juan Hill is ignored by the American press, but none of the cavalry or infantrymen would have claimed victory if it weren't for Parker's guns, as Roosevelt himself acknowledges.
I think Parker deserved rather more credit than any other one man in the entire campaign. He had the rare good judgment and foresight to see the possibilities of the machine guns. He then, by his own exertions, got it to the front and proved that it could do invaluable work on the field of battle, as much in attack as in defense.
The Gatling gun remains a crucial element in the support of not only the Rough Riders, but the whole of the United States Armed Forces deployed in Cuba. As the infantry and cavalry work to ensnare the city of Santiago, driving the Spanish Navy from the port and into a battle with the U.S. Navy, Roosevelt again credits the Gatlings as the linchpin of the entire U.S. military operation as he describes the Rough Riders' harrowing experience during the siege of Santiago, July 3rd through 17th, 1898.
When the shrapnel burst among us on the hillside, we made up our minds that we had better settle down to solid siege work. All of the men who were not in the trenches I took off to the right, back to the Gatling guns, where there was a valley, and dispersed them by troops in sheltered parts. It took us an hour or two's experimenting to find out exactly what spots were free from danger, because some of the Spanish sharpshooters were in trees in our front, where we could not possibly place them from the trenches. And these were able to reach little hollows and depressions where the men were entirely safe from the Spanish artillery and from their trench fire. Moreover, in one hollow, which we thought safe, the Spaniards succeeded in dropping a shell, a fragment of which went through the head of one of my men, who, astonishing to say, lived, although unconscious, for 2 hours afterward.
Again, while the 1st Volunteer Cavalry, or Rough Riders, are given much of the credit for the success in Cuba, the key forces fighting for the U.S. in the Spanish-American War are mostly comprised of the 10th Cavalry, the Buffalo Soldiers. Serving with the African-American fighters of the 10th as quartermaster is First Lieutenant John J. Pershing. John Joseph Pershing fights with the 10th Cavalry at Kettle Hill and San Juan Hill and is cited for gallantry, an honor that will later be upgraded to a Silver Star. Pershing is with the Buffalo Soldiers throughout the siege and surrender of Santiago. Born near Laclede, Missouri, a year before the American Civil War, Pershing's father, John Fletcher Pershing, would go on to work as a sutler for the 18th Missouri Volunteer Infantry, while his mother, Anne Elizabeth Thompson, would raise John and his 5 siblings. In 1878, after graduating high school, Pershing works for a few years as a teacher to African-American students in his hometown. 1882 sees Pershing applying to the United States Military Academy at West Point. In 1886, Pershing is assigned to Troop L of the 6th U.S. Cavalry and serves with the unit in New Mexico, California, Arizona, and North Dakota, participating in military actions to suppress Indian uprisings throughout the Southwest. In skirmishes with the Apache, Pershing earned a citation for bravery. 3 days after the massacre at Wounded Knee, Pershing and Troop L successfully ward off an attack on the 6th Cavalry's supply wagon, forcing Chief War Eagle and the Lakota tribe into retreat. After being promoted to first lieutenant In October of 1892, Pershing is assigned to command a troop of the 10th Cavalry. The regiment comprised of African-American cavalrymen known as Buffalo Soldiers. In 1897, the association with the Buffalo Soldiers earns Pershing the nickname Black Jack when he is appointed as an instructor at West Point. While the nickname is originally derisive and a result of Pershing's reputation as a strict instructor, the name remains with Pershing for the rest of his career.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to help us produce more compelling historical content like this, please like, comment below, and share this video with fellow history buffs. And of course, be sure to subscribe to help keep history happening.